The blood on Florence Zimmerman's hands wasn't her own, and that was exactly what would get her killed. She knelt beside the unconscious ranch hand in the dusty street of Colorado City, Colorado, her fingers pressed against the gaping wound in his side while curious onlookers gathered like vultures circling carrion. It was August 1878, and the high desert sun beat down mercilessly on the small mining town nestled in the shadow of the Rockies. But Florence felt cold as she concentrated on the pulse of life beneath her fingertips. The man had been trampled by a spooked horse not 15 minutes ago, and everyone said he was as good as dead. Florence had been passing by with her basket of herbs when she heard the commotion. Without thinking, she had rushed forward, dropping to her knees in the dirt despite the shocked protests of the bystanders. Now her dress was stained crimson, and her hands moved with practiced precision over the man's broken ribs. She could feel it happening, that strange warmth that spread from somewhere deep in her chest down through her arms and into her palms. The bleeding slowed. The man's breathing, which had been shallow and rattling, grew steadier. Florence's vision blurred at the edges as exhaustion crept through her limbs, but she didn't stop until the worst of the damage was mended. Not healed completely, that would be too obvious, but enough that he would survive if infection didn't set in. When she finally pulled her hands away and sat back on her heels, gasping for breath, the silence around her was deafening. 50 pairs of eyes stared at her with expressions ranging from amazement to horror. Florence's stomach dropped as she realized her mistake. She had been too obvious, too quick. In her desperation to save a life, she had forgotten to hide what she was. "Witchcraft," someone whispered, and the word rippled through the crowd like poison spreading through water. Florence scrambled to her feet, her legs shaking. "No, I just know some medicine, that's all. Herbs and such. My mother taught me." "Ain't no herbs that stop bleeding like that," a man interrupted, his weathered face twisted with suspicion. "I seen what you did, girl. Your hands was glowing." "They weren't," Florence protested, but her voice came out weak and unconvincing. She looked down at the ranch hand, who was being lifted carefully by 2 men. He was alive, breathing, his color already better than it had been. That should have been a miracle to celebrate, but instead it felt like a noose tightening around her neck. "My wife died of fever last month," another man said, his voice rough with grief and anger. "Doc couldn't do nothing for her, but you can do this? What kind of deal did you make with the devil?" "No deal. I'm not a witch. I'm just—" "A healer?" A woman's voice, sharp and bitter. "Or something unnatural, something evil?" The crowd pressed closer, and Florence felt panic rising in her throat. She had seen what happened to women accused of witchcraft, even here in the West where superstition was supposed to hold less sway. Hanging, burning, drowning. Death came in many forms, but it always came. She took a step backward, then another, her hands raised in a placating gesture that only seemed to make things worse. The people of Colorado City had always been wary of her. The quiet young woman of 22 who lived alone in a cabin at the edge of town and grew strange herbs in her garden. She had tried so hard to be careful, to blend in, to seem normal. But compassion had overridden caution, and now she would pay the price. "We should take her to the sheriff," someone suggested, and murmurs of agreement followed. "The sheriff ain't gonna do nothin', another voice countered. "We need to handle this ourselves before she curses the whole town." Florence's heart hammered against her ribs. She gathered her skirts, preparing to run. But before she could move, a figure on horseback pushed through the crowd. The horse was a magnificent gray stallion, and its rider sat tall in the saddle, his broad-brimmed hat casting his face in shadow. "That's enough," the rider said, his voice carrying an authority that cut through the angry muttering. "Back off, all of you." Florence recognized him, though they had never spoken. Vincent Jameson, a cowboy who worked at one of the big cattle ranches north of town. He came into Colorado City every few weeks for supplies, always polite, always keeping to himself. She had noticed him before because he was different from the other ranch hands, quieter, more observant. He read books, which was unusual, and he had kind eyes. Or at least she had thought so from a distance. Now those eyes were fixed on the crowd with an intensity that made even the angriest men hesitate. "This woman just saved a life," Vincent continued, dismounting with fluid grace. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscular build of a man who worked hard for his living. His hair was dark, almost black, and fell to his collar beneath his hat. "And you want to kill her for it?" "She used witchcraft," the first man insisted, though he sounded less certain now. "Dark magic." Vincent walked forward until he stood between Florence and the crowd. She could see him properly now. The strong line of his jaw, the slight crook in his nose that suggested it had been broken at least once, the weathered tan of his skin. He couldn't have been much older than her, perhaps 25 or 26, but he carried himself with the confidence of someone who had seen trouble and learned how to handle it. "I don't see any magic," Vincent said calmly. "I see a woman with knowledge of medicine doing what any decent person would do. If that makes her a witch, then every doctor in the territory is in league with the devil." "It ain't the same, the grieving widower argued. "She did something unnatural." "You want to talk about unnatural?" Vincent's voice took on an edge. "What's unnatural is a mob ready to lynch a woman for helping someone. That man there," he pointed at the ranch hand being carried away, "would be dead if not for her. His wife would be a widow. His children would be fatherless. And you want to punish her for preventing that?" Uncertainty rippled through the crowd. Florence watched in amazement as Vincent's words took effect, saw doubt replacing anger on some faces, but not all of them. Not. There were still men glaring at her with fear and hatred, women clutching crosses and backing away. "She's gifted," Vincent said, and the word hung in the air like a bell ringing. "That's all. Some people have a gift for healing, same as some have a gift for music or working with horses. There's nothing evil about it, nothing to fear. You should be thanking her, not threatening her. Gifted." Florence had never heard it described that way before. Her mother, who had possessed the same strange ability, had always called it a curse. "Hide it," she had whispered on her deathbed 5 years ago. "Never let them see what you can do, Florence. They'll destroy you for it." And Florence had tried, oh, how she had tried. But her mother had also taught her that healing was a responsibility, not a choice. When someone was dying and you had the power to save them, how could you turn away? "The cowboy's got a point," one of the older men in the crowd said slowly. "Maybe we're being hasty." "Hasty?" A woman pushed forward, her face red with anger. "My sister was accused of witchcraft in Salem when I was a girl. They hanged her. And you want to let this one go free?" "This isn't Salem," Vincent said firmly. "And this isn't 1692. We're supposed to be civilized people. Or are we going to start burning women every time we see something we don't understand?" The woman's face contorted with rage, but before she could respond, the sheriff finally arrived, pushing through the crowd with his deputy at his heels. Sheriff Morrison was a heavy-set man in his 50s, more interested in keeping the peace than enforcing harsh justice, but Florence knew he wouldn't protect her if the town turned against her completely. "What's going on here?" Morrison demanded, his hand resting on his gun belt. Everyone started talking at once, voices overlapping in a cacophony of accusations and explanations. The sheriff held up his hand for silence, his eyes moving from the crowd to Florence to Vincent and back again. "Miss Zimmerman," he said finally, "is it true you healed that ranch hand, Thomas Hartley, the one who got trampled?" Florence opened her mouth, but no sound came out. If she admitted it, she was condemning herself. If she denied it, she was calling all these witnesses liars, which would only make things worse. "She has a gift for healing," Vincent said before she could find her voice. "I've heard about people like that, folks who can sense what's wrong in a body and know how to fix it. Indian medicine men have it sometimes. It's natural, not supernatural. Just rare." The sheriff looked at Vincent with interest. "You know something about this, Jameson?" "I've read about it," Vincent said smoothly. "There was an article in a medical journal about people with unusual healing abilities. Scientists think it might have something to do with electricity in the body, or maybe just exceptional intuition. Either way, it's not witchcraft. It's just a gift some people are born with. Florence had no idea if any of that was true, but Vincent spoke with such conviction that even she almost believed him. The sheriff seemed to be considering it, his weathered face thoughtful. "Is that so?" Morrison said slowly. "Well, now that's interesting. Still, Miss Zimmerman, you caused quite a stir here. Maybe it would be best if you laid low for a while, let folks calm down." "She's not a criminal," Vincent interjected. "She doesn't need to hide." "I'm trying to keep her safe," the sheriff said, a note of irritation in his voice. "There's folks here who won't be satisfied with explanations about science and gifts. They want blood. So unless you want to see her strung up from an oak tree, I suggest she makes herself scarce for a few days." Florence finally found her voice. "I understand, Sheriff. I'll go home and stay there." "Might want to go further than home," Morrison said quietly. "Your cabin's pretty isolated. Easy for an angry mob to pay you a visit in the night, if you take my meaning." Ice slid down Florence's spine. He was right. She had heard the hatred in some of those voices, seen the fear in their eyes. Fear made people do terrible things. "She can come to the ranch," Vincent said suddenly. "We've got an extra cabin, used to house a foreman before he moved on. She'll be safe there, and my boss won't mind. He owes me some favors." Florence stared at him in shock. "I couldn't possibly impose like that. I don't even know you." "You know me well enough," Vincent said, meeting her eyes for the first time. His gaze was steady and warm, without any of the suspicion or fear she had seen in the crowd. "And I know you're a healer who saved a man's life today. That's all I need to know." "But why would you help me?" Florence couldn't understand it. Men didn't help women they didn't know, not without expecting something in return. Suspicion warred with desperate hope in her chest. "Because it's the right thing to do," Vincent said simply. "And because I don't believe in punishing people for doing good in this world." The sheriff looked between them and nodded. "That might work. The Triple J Ranch is far enough out that folks won't bother her there, and old Josiah won't tolerate any vigilante nonsense on his land. What do you say, Miss Zimmerman?" What choice did she have? Florence looked at the crowd, still muttering and hostile despite Vincent's intervention, then at the cowboy who had appeared out of nowhere to defend her. He had called her gifted, not cursed. He had compared her to medicine men and scientists, not demons, and he was offering her safety when she had nowhere else to turn. "All right," she said quietly. "Thank you, Mr. Jameson. I accept your offer." "Just Vincent," he said, and allowed himself a small smile that transformed his serious face. "No need for formalities when we're going to be neighbors." The crowd began to disperse, though many people shot dark looks at Florence as they left. The sheriff gave Vincent some instructions about keeping the peace, then headed off to deal with other business. And suddenly Florence found herself alone with the cowboy who had just turned her entire life upside down. "I need to get some things from my cabin," she said, trying to keep her voice steady, "and I have animals to tend to." "I'll ride with you," Vincent said immediately, "just in case anyone gets ideas about following you." They walked to her cabin in silence, Vincent leading his horse while Florence tried to process what had just happened. Her hands had finally stopped shaking, but she could still feel the residual warmth in her palms, the echo of the healing energy that had flowed through her. It always left her tired afterward, drained in a way that sleep couldn't quite fix. But seeing that ranch hand breathing, knowing she had saved him, made the exhaustion worthwhile. Her cabin appeared through the cottonwood trees, small and neat with a garden out front bursting with medicinal herbs. She had built this life carefully over the past 5 years, ever since her mother died and left her alone. She grew her herbs, made her salves and tinctures, helped people when she could without drawing too much attention, and now it was all falling apart. "Nice place," Vincent said, looking around with genuine interest. "You grow all these yourself?" "Yes, my mother taught me about herbs before she passed. I've been studying on my own since then, trying to learn more." Florence moved toward the garden, checking the plants with practiced ease, despite her exhaustion. "I'll need to harvest some of these if I'm going away. Can't let them go to waste." "Take whatever you need. I'll help you pack." They worked together in comfortable silence, Vincent following her directions as she gathered herbs, roots, and seeds. He was surprisingly gentle with the plants, careful not to damage them as he harvested. Florence found herself watching him when she thought he wasn't looking, trying to understand this man who had stepped in to defend her. "Why did you really help me?" she asked finally, unable to contain her curiosity any longer. "You could have just ridden past like everyone else." Vincent looked up from the bundle of dried sage he was tying. "Would you have wanted me to?" "No, but that's not an answer." He was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "My sister had a gift," he said finally, "different from yours. She could tell when storms were coming, even when the sky was clear, could feel them in her bones days in advance. Some folks thought it was witchcraft, said she was consorting with demons to know God's weather." His jaw tightened. "They ran us out of our town in Texas when I was 17. My father tried to defend her, and they beat him near to death. We lost everything." "I'm sorry," Florence said softly. "Is your sister all right now?" "She's married to a rancher in Wyoming. Happy and safe, last I heard. Keeps her gift quiet. Doesn't talk about it anymore." Vincent's eyes met hers. "But it changed something in me, seeing how people turned on her just for being different. I swore I'd never stand by and let it happen to someone else if I could help it. So when I saw that crowd closing in on you, I couldn't just ride away." Florence felt something crack open in her chest, some hard shell she had built around her heart. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't think you realize what you did back there. You may have saved my life." "You saved that ranch hand's life. Seems only fair someone returned the favor." Vincent stood up, brushing dirt from his pants. "Come on, let's get your things packed. It'll be dark in a few hours, and I want to get you settled at the ranch before then." Florence had 2 chickens, a goat, and an old dog named Rufus, who had shown up on her doorstep one winter and never left. Vincent helped her load the animals into a small cart she owned, along with her clothes, books, and precious medical supplies. She looked back at her cabin one last time as they left, wondering if she would ever return to it. The ride to the Triple J Ranch took about an hour, following a winding trail through scrubland and rocky terrain. The Rocky Mountains loomed in the distance, their peaks still touched with snow despite the August heat. Vincent rode alongside the cart, occasionally pointing out landmarks or sharing stories about the ranch. "Josiah Jenkins owns the placery," he explained. "He's tough but fair, been ranching this land for 20 years. His wife passed away a few winters back, and his son helps run things now. They've got about 30 hands working for them during busy seasons, maybe 15 year-round. It's good work, honest work. And you think they'll really let me stay?" Florence couldn't quite believe this was happening, that she was being offered sanctuary by complete strangers. "Josiah owes me," Vincent said again. "I saved his son from drowning in a flash flood last spring. Nearly drowned myself doing it, but the boy made it out alive. Josiah said if I ever needed anything at all, I just had to ask. I'm asking." The ranch appeared as they crested a rise, sprawling across a valley with the river cutting through it like a silver ribbon. The main house was large and well-maintained, with a barn, several outbuildings, and a scattering of small cabins for the ranch hands. Cattle dotted the grasslands, hundreds of them, and Florence could see men working in the distance. Vincent led her to one of the cabins set slightly apart from the others, nestled under a stand of aspens. It was small but sturdy, with a covered porch and a stone chimney. Inside it was dusty but furnished with a bed, a table, chairs, and a wood stove. "It's not much," Vincent said, "but it's weatherproof and private. You can fix it up however you like." Florence set down the bag she was carrying and looked around, feeling tears prick at her eyes. "It's perfect," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to thank me, just be safe." Vincent hesitated in the doorway, seeming uncertain for the first time since she met him. "I'll be in the bunkhouse with the other hands, about 100 yards that way. If you need anything or if anyone bothers you, you come get me. Understand?" "I understand." "I mean it, Florence. Day or night doesn't matter. You feel unsafe, you come find me." The way he said her name with such genuine concern made her heart skip. "I will. I promise." After Vincent left to speak with the ranch owner, Florence set about making the cabin livable. She swept out the dust, aired out the bedding, and settled her animals in a small lean-to attached to the back. Rufus seemed pleased with the arrangement, wagging his tail as he explored the new territory. The chickens clucked contentedly in their coop, and the goat immediately found the best grass to munch on. By the time night fell, Florence had transformed the cabin into something resembling a home. She lit a lantern and sat at the table, suddenly overwhelmed by exhaustion. The healing had taken more out of her than usual, probably because the ranch hand's injuries had been so severe. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured herself some water from the pitcher Vincent had filled before he left. A knock at the door made her jump. She opened it to find Vincent standing there with a plate of food, steam rising from what looked like stew and fresh bread. "Figured you might be too tired to cook," he said, and cook made extra for dinner. "You didn't have to do that." But Florence took the plate gratefully, her stomach growling at the smell. She hadn't eaten since breakfast, and it was well past sunset now. "Mind if I come in for a minute?" Vincent asked. "I talked to Josiah, and I wanted to tell you what he said." Florence stepped back to let him enter. He removed his hat and set it on the table, running a hand through his dark hair. In the lamplight, she could see that his eyes were a warm brown, almost amber in certain angles. "Josiah's fine with you staying here as long as you need to," Vincent said. "He asked what skills you have, and I told him you're a healer. His hands get injured all the time, cuts and sprains and such. If you're willing to help out when needed, he'd consider that fair trade for the cabin." "Of course I'm willing. I'd be happy to help." "Good. He also said he'd spread the word that you're under his protection. Anyone who wants to cause you trouble will have to answer to him, and most folks around here know better than to cross Josiah Jenkins." Relief flooded through Florence so intensely that she had to sit down. "I don't know what to say. You've done so much for me, and I don't even know why." Vincent pulled out a chair and sat across from her. "I told you why, but maybe there's more to it than just my sister." He was quiet for a moment, seeming to gather his thoughts. "When I saw you kneeling in that street with blood on your hands, trying to save a dying man, you looked like the bravest person I'd ever seen. Everyone else was standing around watching him die, but you acted. You didn't care about the risk to yourself, you just cared about saving a life. That's rare, Florence. That kind of courage, that kind of compassion, the world needs more of it, not less." Florence felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I'm not brave. I was terrified." "Bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's acting in spite of it." Vincent's gaze held hers, intense and sincere. "What you did today was extraordinary, and I'll be damned if I let anyone punish you for it." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of the day settling around them. Florence picked at her stew, suddenly shy under Vincent's regard. "Can I ask you something?" she said finally. "What you said back there, about electricity in the body and medical journals, was any of that true?" Vincent's lips quirked in a half-smile. "Some of it. I did read about unusual healing abilities in a journal once, but mostly I was making it up as I went along, trying to give them a rational explanation they could accept. Seemed better than letting them think it was witchcraft. It worked. You're very convincing when you want to be. Had to be. Your life depended on it." The seriousness returned to his face. "But I meant what I said about you being gifted. Whatever you can do, however it works, it's not evil. I believe that with everything in me." Florence felt tears threatening again. No one had ever said anything like that to her before, had ever tried to reframe her ability as something positive rather than shameful. Even her mother, who had possessed the same gift, had viewed it as a burden to be hidden. "My mother would tell me stories about our ancestors," Florence said quietly. "She said the women in our family have always been healers, going back generations, but we've always had to hide it, always had to pretend we're just good with herbs and luck. She made me promise to be careful, to never reveal what I could really do, and today I broke that promise." "You saved a life. Your mother would understand that." Would she? Florence wasn't sure. Her mother's fear had been so profound, so deeply ingrained. She used to have nightmares about witch trials, about being burned or drowned. She died afraid, Vincent, afraid of what she was, afraid of what might happen to me. I don't want to live like that, always hiding, always terrified. But I don't know how to be anything else. Vincent reached across the table and took her hand. The gesture was simple, but it sent a shock through Florence's system. His hand was warm and calloused from ranch work, strong and steady. "You don't have to be afraid anymore," he said. "Not here. Not with me. I meant what I said about protecting you, and I'm a man of my word." Florence looked down at their joined hands, feeling something shift in her chest. This cowboy who had appeared out of nowhere, who had defended her to an angry mob, who had given her shelter and safety and kindness when she had expected none of those things. She barely knew him, and yet she felt safer with him than she had with anyone since her mother died. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Vincent squeezed her hand gently before releasing it. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will be better, I promise." After he left, Florence finished her stew and prepared for bed. As she lay in the darkness, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch settling around her, she thought about the cowboy with the kind eyes and the protective streak. She thought about the way he had called her gifted, had defended her without hesitation, had offered her sanctuary when her own home had become dangerous. And for the first time in a very long time, Florence Zimmerman allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, things would be all right. The next few days passed in a blur of adjustment. Florence settled into life on the ranch, learning the rhythms and routines of the place. True to his word, Josiah Jenkins made it clear that she was under his protection, and the ranch hands accepted her presence without question. Some were curious about her healing abilities, others were wary, but none were hostile. Vincent checked on her every day, usually stopping by in the evening after his work was done. He would sit on her porch and tell her about his day, or bring her things she might need: extra firewood, fresh milk from the dairy cows, books from his personal collection. Florence found herself looking forward to these visits more than she wanted to admit, anticipating the sound of his boots on the porch steps, the way he smiled when she opened the door. She learned things about him in bits and pieces. He was 26, had been working as a cowboy since he was 18, moving from ranch to ranch across the West. He loved horses and books in equal measure, which seemed an unusual combination for a ranch hand. He had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard sometimes, making her laugh when she least expected it. And he was patient, never pushing her to talk about her gift or her past, content to let her share things in her own time. On her 4th day at the ranch, one of the cowboys came to her cabin with a gash on his arm from a broken fence. Florence treated him on her porch, cleaning the wound and applying a salve made from comfrey and calendula. She could feel the healing energy wanting to flow, could sense exactly what needed to be done to speed the recovery, but she held back. Too obvious, too risky, even here. But when she pressed her fingers against the wound, checking for signs of infection, the warmth flowed through her before she could stop it. The cowboy gasped as the worst of the inflammation faded, the edges of the cut beginning to knit together before his eyes. "Jesus," he breathed. "The stories are true. You really can heal people." Florence pulled her hands back quickly, her heart racing. "It's just good medicine," she said, but her voice shook. The cowboy, whose name was Daniel, looked at her with wonder rather than fear. "That's incredible. How do you do it?" "I don't know," Florence admitted. "I've never understood how it works, just that it does." "Can you teach someone?" "I don't think so. I've tried to explain it, but there's nothing to explain. It just happens." Daniel flexed his arm experimentally, marveling at the reduced pain. "Well, whatever it is, I'm grateful. This would have taken weeks to heal on its own." After he left, Florence sat on her porch feeling shaken. She had tried so hard to be careful, to hide her ability, but it kept slipping out. The urge to heal was too strong, too fundamental to who she was. She couldn't suppress it. Not completely. "You all right?" Vincent's voice made her look up. He had appeared around the side of the cabin, leading his horse after a day working the range. Dust covered his clothes and he looked tired, but his eyes were alert and concerned. "Daniel was here," Florence said. I tried to just treat his wound normally, but the healing happened anyway. I couldn't stop it. Vincent tied his horse to the porch rail and sat down beside her. Did he react badly? No, he seemed amazed. But Vincent, what if word spreads? What if people in town hear that I'm still healing people and they come after me again? Then we'll deal with it. His voice was calm, steady. But I don't think Daniel's going to cause problems. Most of the hands here, they've seen enough strange things in their lives that a healing woman doesn't faze them much. Cowboys are a superstitious lot, but they're also practical. You help them, they'll be loyal to you. I hope you're right. They sat in silence for a while, watching the sun sink toward the mountains. The evening air was cooling, bringing relief from the day's heat. Florence was acutely aware of Vincent sitting beside her, the solid presence of him, the way she felt safer just having him near. Can I tell you something? She said quietly. I've spent my whole life being afraid of what I am. My mother's fear became my fear, and I've been hiding for so long that I don't remember what it feels like not to hide. But when you called me gifted that day in town, something shifted. For the first time, I wondered if maybe there was a different way to see it. There is, Vincent said firmly. Your gift is exactly that, a gift, something precious that can do good in the world. The fact that people don't understand it doesn't make it wrong. I want to believe that. Then believe it, I do. He turned to look at her, and Florence was struck by the intensity in his eyes. You're remarkable, Florence, not just because of what you can do, but because of who you are. You're brave and compassionate and kind, and anyone who can't see that is a fool. Florence felt her breath catch. The way he was looking at her with such open admiration and something else she couldn't quite name made her heart race. She realized suddenly that she was falling for this cowboy, this unexpected protector who had changed her life in the span of a single afternoon. The realization terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. Vincent, she started, not sure what she wanted to say. But before she could find the words, one of the ranch hands came running up, his face pale with panic. We need help. There's been an accident at the river. Tommy fell from his horse and hit his head on a rock. He's unconscious and bleeding bad. Vincent was on his feet instantly. Show us where. Florence grabbed her medical bag and ran after them, her fatigue forgotten in the rush of urgency. They raced across the ranch yard to the river, where a crowd of cowboys had gathered around a prone figure. Florence pushed through them and dropped to her knees beside the injured man. Tommy was young, maybe 19, with blood streaming from a gash on his temple. His breathing was shallow, his skin clammy. Florence pressed her fingers to his neck, feeling for his pulse. It was weak and erratic. Everyone back up, Vincent ordered, his voice carrying the weight of command. Give her room to work. Florence assessed the damage quickly. The external wound wasn't the real problem. It was what was happening inside his skull that worried her. She could sense swelling in his brain. Pressure building that would kill him if it wasn't relieved. This wasn't something that could be fixed with herbs or bandages. This required her gift fully and completely, regardless of who was watching. She made her decision in a heartbeat. She pressed both hands to Tommy's head, one on the wound and one on the other side, and let the healing energy flow. It poured out of her in a rush, far more than she had ever used before. She felt it seeking out the damage, reducing the swelling, repairing torn blood vessels, knitting bone and tissue back together. The world dimmed around the edges. Florence heard someone call her name as if from a great distance. The healing was taking too much, draining her too deeply, but she couldn't stop until it was done. Tommy's life hung in the balance, and she was the only thing standing between him and death. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, she felt Tommy's pulse strengthen, felt his breathing even out. The worst of the damage was repaired. He would live. Florence tried to pull her hands back, but her arms wouldn't obey. The world tilted sideways, and she realized dimly that she was falling. Strong arms caught her before she hit the ground, and she found herself cradled against Vincent's chest. "I've got you," he murmured, his voice tight with worry. "You're all right. I've got you." "Is he alive?" Florence managed to whisper. "Florence, he's breathing. You saved him." Vincent stood up, lifting her easily in his arms. "But you damn near killed yourself doing it." Florence wanted to protest that she was fine, but darkness was creeping in at the edges of her vision. She had never pushed herself that hard before, had never used so much of her gift at once. The exhaustion was overwhelming, dragging her down like a riptide. "Vincent," she mumbled, fighting to stay conscious. "The people watching, they saw everything." "Let them see," Vincent said fiercely. "You saved a man's life right in front of them. If anyone has a problem with that, they'll answer to me." Those were the last words Florence heard before the darkness claimed her completely. She woke in her own bed, sunlight streaming through the window. For a moment she was disoriented, unsure how much time had passed. Then memory came flooding back. Tommy's injury, the healing, the overwhelming exhaustion. Florence sat up carefully, testing her body. She felt weak and shaky, but the bone-deep exhaustion had faded to something manageable. How long had she been unconscious? The door opened and Vincent entered carrying a tray with food and water. His face was haggard, dark circles under his eyes, and he was wearing the same clothes from yesterday. He looked like he hadn't slept. "You're awake," he said, relief flooding his features. "Thank God. How do you feel?" "Tired, but better than I expected." Florence accepted the water he offered and drank deeply. "How long was I out?" "About 14 hours. It's noon now." Vincent set the tray on the bedside table and sat in the chair he had apparently pulled up next to her bed. "You scared the hell out of me, Florence. You just collapsed, and I couldn't wake you up. I didn't know if you were going to be all right." "I'm sorry. I've never used that much of my gift before. I didn't know it would affect me like that." "Tommy's alive because of you. He woke up this morning with nothing worse than a headache. The doctor who looked at him said it was a miracle, that he should have died, or at least had permanent brain damage from a head injury like that." Florence closed her eyes briefly, relief washing over her. "I'm glad he's all right." "The men saw what you did," Vincent said carefully. "All of them. There's no hiding your gift now, not after a healing like that." Fear spiked through Florence's exhaustion. "Have they turned against me?" "No, just the opposite." Vincent's expression softened. "They're calling you an angel. Half of them want to build you a shrine. Josiah said he's never seen his men so in awe of someone." "But the town doesn't matter. You're safe here, Florence. These men won't let anything happen to you." Vincent reached out and took her hand, the gesture familiar now. "And neither will I. I promise you that." Florence looked at their joined hands, then up at his face. He looked exhausted and worried, and fiercely protective, and something in her chest cracked open completely. This man who barely knew her had sat by her bedside all night, had defended her to everyone, had made her safety his personal mission. No one had ever cared for her like that before. "You should rest," she said softly. "You look like you haven't slept." "I wasn't going to sleep until I knew you were all right." "I'm all right now. Please, Vincent. You'll make yourself sick." He hesitated, clearly torn between his exhaustion and his desire to stay with her. Finally, he nodded. "I'll rest, but only if you promise to call me if you need anything at all." "I promise." Vincent stood up slowly, stretching muscles that had been cramped from sitting too long. At the door, he paused and looked back at her. "I'm glad you're all right, Florence. When you collapsed, I thought—" He broke off, shaking his head. "Just rest. I'll check on you later." After he left, Florence lay back against the pillows, her mind racing despite her physical exhaustion. The ranch hands knew about her gift now, fully and completely. There was no more hiding, no more pretending, and instead of fear and hatred, she had received awe and gratitude. It seemed impossible, too good to be true. But Vincent had promised she was safe here, and Florence was starting to believe him. Over the next week, Florence recovered her strength and fell into a new routine. Word of Tommy's miraculous recovery spread through the ranch, and soon cowboys were coming to her with all manner of ailments. She treated sprains and cuts, stomach ailments and infections using both conventional medicine and her gift when necessary. The men were respectful and grateful, treating her with a deference that still felt strange. Vincent was a constant presence, checking on her multiple times a day, helping her gather herbs from the surrounding countryside, sitting with her in the evenings. They talked about everything and nothing, their conversations ranging from philosophy to favorite foods to childhood memories. Florence found herself sharing things with him that she had never told anyone, and he did the same. She learned that he had been born in Texas, the middle child of 5. His father had been a farmer before the accusations against his sister destroyed the family. His mother had died when he was young, leaving his father to raise the children alone. After they fled Texas, the family had split up, each sibling going their own way to find safety in new lives. Vincent had chosen the life of a cowboy because it meant freedom and independence, no ties binding him to any one place. "Do you miss them?" Florence asked one evening as they sat on her porch watching the stars emerge. "Your family?" "Sometimes," Vincent admitted. "But we write letters when we can, keep in touch. My youngest brother is in California trying his hand at mining. My older sister is in Kansas with her husband, and my sister with the gift, Rachel, she's happy in Wyoming like I told you. We're scattered, but we're all right." "It must be lonely, moving from place to place." "It was," Vincent said quietly, "until recently." The way he looked at her when he said it made Florence's heart skip. There was something growing between them, something that went beyond gratitude or friendship. She felt it every time he smiled at her, every time their hands brushed accidentally, every time he looked at her with those warm brown eyes that seemed to see straight into her soul. But Florence was afraid to acknowledge it, afraid to hope for something more. Men didn't fall for women like her, women with strange gifts and dangerous reputations. And even if Vincent cared for her, how could she ask him to tie himself to someone who would always be at risk, always be hunted by those who feared what they didn't understand? Her worries came to a head 2 weeks after the incident with Tommy. Florence was in her garden harvesting chamomile when one of the ranch hands came running up with news from town. "Miss Zimmerman," he panted, "there's trouble. Some folks from Colorado City are headed this way. They're saying you used witchcraft on that first man you healed, Thomas Hartley. He died yesterday, and they're blaming you." Florence felt the blood drain from her face. "He died? But he was recovering well when I last heard." "Infection set in, apparently, got into his blood. Nothing anyone could do." The ranch hand looked genuinely sympathetic. "It's not your fault. But they're not seeing it that way. They're calling you a witch again, saying you cursed him." "How many are coming?" Vincent's voice made Florence turn. He had appeared from the barn, his face set in grim lines. "Maybe 20 men. Sheriff Morrison is trying to hold them off, but they're angry. They want justice." "They want a lynching," Vincent corrected harshly. He turned to Florence. "Go inside and pack a bag. We're leaving." "Leaving? Where would we go?" "Anywhere but here. If they're coming, we need to get you far away from this place. I can't ask you to abandon your job, your life here, for me." Vincent crossed to her in 3 long strides and took her by the shoulders. "Florence, listen to me. Your life is in danger. Nothing else matters. We're leaving, and we're leaving now." But before Florence could respond, Josiah Jenkins came striding up with a rifle in his hands and a determined look on his weathered face. "Nobody's running," he said firmly. "This is my land, and no lynch mob is going to set foot on it. We'll handle this the way civilized people handle things." "Josiah, there's 20 of them." "And I've got 30 ranch hands who will stand with me," Josiah interrupted. "Plus you, Vincent, and you're worth 3 men in a fight. We'll make them see reason. Or we'll turn them back by force if we have to. But we're not letting them take Miss Zimmerman." Florence felt tears spring to her eyes. "Why? Why would you risk so much for me?" "Because you saved my men," Josiah said simply. "Tommy's alive because of you. Daniel's arm healed clean because of you. I've seen a dozen small miracles in the past 2 weeks, and I'm not about to let an ignorant mob destroy the person responsible for them. You're under my protection, and that means something." Within the hour, the ranch hands had assembled, armed and ready. Florence stood on the porch of the main house with Vincent beside her, watching the road for signs of the approaching mob. Her hands were shaking, but Vincent's steady presence kept her from completely falling apart. "If this goes badly," she said quietly, "promise me you won't let them hurt anyone trying to defend me. I'll go with them if I have to." "Like hell you will," Vincent said flatly. "That mob takes you over my dead body." "Vincent." "No arguments, Florence. I made a promise to protect you, and I intend to keep it." He looked at her, and his expression softened slightly. "Besides, I can't let anything happen to you. I've gotten too used to having you around." Before Florence could process that statement, the mob came into view. They rode up the road in a cloud of dust, maybe 25 men on horseback, all armed and angry. At the front was a man Florence recognized, the widower who had accused her of witchcraft that first day. His face was twisted with grief and rage. Josiah stepped forward to meet them, his rifle held loosely but ready. "That's far enough," he called out. "State your business." "We're here for the witch," the widower shouted. "The woman who killed Thomas Hartley with her dark magic." "Miss Zimmerman didn't kill anyone. Hartley died of infection, which can happen to any wound. You can't blame her for that." "She cursed him. He was getting better, and then suddenly he sickened and died. That's witchcraft." "That's medicine," Josiah countered. "Sometimes people die despite the best treatment. It doesn't mean anyone cursed them." The mob murmured angrily, but another voice cut through the noise. Sheriff Morrison pushed his horse forward, looking frustrated and tired. "I tried to stop them," he said to Josiah, "but they wouldn't listen to reason." "Will you let them take her?" Josiah asked. "No," Morrison said firmly. "I don't believe in witch hunts, but I can't fight off 20 men by myself." "You're not by yourself." Josiah gestured to the armed ranch hands behind him. "Anyone who wants Miss Zimmerman will have to go through all of us." The widower's face purpled with rage. "You're protecting a witch? Have you all lost your minds?" "We're protecting a healer," Vincent said, stepping forward. "A woman who has done nothing but good since she arrived here. And if you want her, you'll have to kill me first." Florence grabbed his arm. "Vincent, don't—" "I mean it," Vincent said, his voice carrying across the yard. "Every single one of you listening. This woman saved a man's life right in front of you in town. She's saved more lives since then. The fact that she couldn't save every single person doesn't make her evil. It makes her human. And I'll die before I let you hurt her." The conviction in his voice rang out like a bell. Several of the men in the mob looked uncertain, their anger wavering, but the widower was unmoved. "Pretty words," he spat, "but I know what I know. My wife died, and Hartley died, and she's the common thread. She's a witch, and she needs to burn." "Then you'll have to burn me too," said a new voice. Tommy, the young ranch hand Florence had saved from the head injury, stepped forward. His head was still bandaged, but he looked healthy and strong. "Because if she's a witch, she's the good kind. She saved my life when I should have died." "And mine," Daniel added, joining Tommy. "My arm was cut to the bone, and she healed it in days instead of weeks." One by one, the ranch hands Florence had treated stepped forward, each one testifying to her healing, her kindness, her goodness. The mob's certainty began to crack, doubt creeping into angry faces. "She's not a witch," Josiah said again. "She's a gifted healer. And if that makes you uncomfortable, that's your problem, not hers. Now I suggest you all turn around and go home before this gets ugly." The standoff stretched on, tension thick in the air. Florence held her breath, waiting to see which way it would tip. The widower looked around at his mob, seeing the uncertainty, the wavering resolve. Then his shoulders slumped. "This isn't over," he said, but his voice had lost its fury. "Mark my words, she'll bring ruin to you all." "We'll take that chance," Vincent said. "Now leave. This is private property and you're not welcome here." Slowly, reluctantly, the mob began to disperse. Some of the men looked ashamed, others still angry, but they turned their horses and headed back toward town. The widower was the last to leave, his eyes burning with hatred as he looked at Florence one final time. When they were finally gone, Florence felt her legs give out. Vincent caught her immediately, holding her steady as reaction set in. She was shaking so hard her teeth chattered, the reality of how close she had come to death hitting her all at once. "It's all right," Vincent murmured, holding her close. "They're gone. You're safe." "For how long?" Florence whispered. "They'll come back, Vincent, or others will come. This will never end." "Then we'll face it together. Every time, as many times as it takes." He pulled back just enough to look at her face. "I'm not letting you go, Florence. Not now. Not ever. Do you understand?" Florence looked up at him, seeing the fierce determination in his eyes, the protective strength, and something else. Something deeper and warmer that made her breath catch. "Why?" she whispered. "Why are you doing all this for me?" Vincent's hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch impossibly gentle. "Because I love you," he said simply. "I think I've loved you since the moment I saw you kneeling in that street, fighting to save a stranger's life. You're the bravest, most beautiful, most extraordinary person I've ever met, and I can't imagine my life without you in it." Florence felt tears spill down her cheeks. "I love you too," she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I was afraid to say it, afraid to hope, but I do. I love you, Vincent." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise. Florence melted into him, feeling safe for the first time in her entire life. Not because the danger was gone, but because she wasn't facing it alone anymore. She had Vincent, and he had her, and together they were stronger than any mob, any accusation, any fear. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Florence saw the ranch hands grinning and Josiah looking satisfied. Sheriff Morrison tipped his hat and headed back to town, and life on the ranch slowly returned to normal. But nothing was really normal anymore because everything had changed. Florence had been accused of witchcraft and defended, had nearly died from using her gift and recovered, had fallen in love with the cowboy who called her gifted instead of cursed. And she realized that maybe, just maybe, her mother had been wrong. Maybe being different didn't have to mean being alone. Maybe having a gift didn't have to be a curse. Maybe love could bloom even in the harshest circumstances, strong and true and unbreakable. That evening, as Florence and Vincent sat on her porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple, she felt something settle in her chest. Peace, or the beginning of it. Hope, fragile, but growing stronger. "What happens now?" she asked, leaning against Vincent's shoulder. "Now we build a life together," Vincent said, wrapping his arm around her. "If you'll have me." "I'll have you," Florence said, smiling through happy tears, "for as long as you'll stay." "Then I'm staying forever," Vincent promised, and sealed it with a kiss. The next few months passed in a blur of happiness that Florence had never imagined possible. She and Vincent were officially courting, which meant stolen moments throughout the day, long walks in the evening, and endless conversations about everything and nothing. The ranch hands teased them good-naturedly, and Josiah gave his blessing, pleased to see two of his favorite people find happiness together. Florence continued her healing work, though she learned to pace herself better after the incident with Tommy. She treated the ranch hands, and eventually word spread to neighboring ranches. People began coming from miles around seeking her help, and Florence found herself busier than she had ever been in Colorado City. Most people were respectful, grateful for her services. A few were wary, but Vincent's protective presence discouraged anyone from causing trouble. He made it clear that anyone who threatened Florence would answer to him, and his reputation as a man not to be crossed kept the peace. In October, as the aspen trees turned gold and the air took on a crisp chill, Vincent asked Florence to marry him. They were by the river watching the water flow past when he knelt down and pulled out a simple gold ring. "I don't have much to offer you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Just myself, my protection, and my love for as long as I live. But if that's enough, Florence Zimmerman, I'd be honored if you'd be my wife." "Yes," Florence said immediately, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They were married in November. A small ceremony at the ranch with the hands as witnesses. Florence wore a simple white dress she had sewn herself, and Vincent wore his best clothes, looking so handsome that Florence's heart nearly burst. Josiah officiated, having been ordained as a minister years ago, and pronounced them husband and wife with genuine joy in his voice. The kiss Vincent gave her when they were declared married was tender and passionate all at once, a promise of all the days to come. Florence felt like she was floating as they celebrated with the ranch hands, eating cake and dancing to fiddle music under the stars. That night, in the cabin that was now their shared home, Vincent carried her across the threshold and set her down gently. They had expanded the cabin over the past months, adding a larger bedroom and a dedicated space for Florence's medical supplies. It felt like a real home now, warm and welcoming. "Happy?" Vincent asked, pulling her close. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Florence admitted. "A year ago, I was alone and afraid. Now I have you and a home and people who accept me for what I am. It feels like a dream." "It's real," Vincent promised, kissing her forehead, "and it's only going to get better." He was right. The winter passed peacefully, with Florence and Vincent growing closer every day. They learned each other's rhythms, their habits and preferences, their hopes and fears. Vincent taught Florence to ride better, taking her on long excursions into the mountains. Florence taught Vincent more about herbs and healing, sharing the knowledge her mother had passed down. In the spring, Florence discovered she was pregnant. The realization filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. Would her child have her gift? Would they face the same persecution she had endured? But Vincent's excitement tempered her fears. He was going to be a father, and his happiness was infectious. "We'll protect them," he promised, his hand resting on her still flat belly. "Whatever gifts they have, whatever challenges they face, we'll be there, always." Florence's pregnancy progressed smoothly, though she tired more easily and had to cut back on her healing work. Vincent became even more protective, hovering over her like a worried mother hen until Florence had to laugh and shoo him away. The ranch hands were excited about the baby, already planning to spoil the child rotten. Josiah started building a cradle in his workshop, and the cook began setting aside special foods to help Florence stay healthy. But the peaceful existence they had built was shattered one hot day in July. Florence was in her garden, carefully tending her herbs despite the summer heat, when she heard horses approaching fast. Looking up, she saw Sheriff Morrison riding toward the cabin with an urgent expression. "Miss Florence," he called, then corrected himself. "Mrs. Jameson, where's Vincent?" "Working the north pasture with the others. What's wrong?" Morrison dismounted, his face grim. "There's been another accusation of witchcraft in Colorado City. A woman named Martha who does midwifery. She delivered a baby 2 days ago, and the mother died from bleeding afterward. The family is blaming Martha, saying she cursed the woman." Florence felt her blood run cold. That's ridiculous. Women die in childbirth all the time, even with the best care. You and I know that, but grief makes people irrational. They're working themselves into a frenzy, and I'm worried they'll come after you next. If they can justify going after one healer, they might decide to go after another. I haven't been to town in months. I've stayed away like you suggested. I know, but that might not matter. Fear spreads like wildfire, and right now folks are scared. Morrison looked troubled. "I came to warn you. Keep your eyes open, stay close to the ranch, and if you see any sign of trouble, you get Vincent and the others immediately." After the sheriff left, Florence stood in her garden feeling the old fear creeping back. She had thought she was safe here, that the danger had passed. But it never really went away, did it? As long as people feared what they didn't understand, as long as they needed someone to blame for life's tragedies, women like her would be targets. Vincent found her there an hour later, still standing among the herbs with tears on her face. He didn't need to ask what was wrong. One look at her expression told him everything. He pulled her into his arms and held her while she cried. Morrison came, she finally managed to explain. There's another accusation in town. He thinks they might come after me again. Vincent's arms tightened around her. Then we'll be ready. But Florence, maybe it's time to consider leaving. We could go somewhere else, start fresh where no one knows about your gift. And what happens when I heal someone there? When I can't help myself from using my gift? We'll just have to run again. Florence pulled back to look at him. I'm tired of running, Vincent. I'm tired of being afraid, but I don't know what else to do. We stand our ground, Vincent said firmly. We defend you same as before. And if it comes to it, we'll make sure everyone knows that persecuting healers is wrong. We'll change minds, one person at a time if we have to. His optimism was sweet, but Florence wasn't sure it was realistic. People's fears ran deep, and superstition had roots that went back centuries. How could two people fight against that? The answer came 3 days later, in the most unexpected way. Florence was treating a ranch hand's sprained wrist when Martha, the accused midwife, arrived at the ranch. She was a small, determined woman in her 50s, and she looked terrified but resolute. I heard about you, Martha said without preamble. Heard you were accused of witchcraft, too, and that you survived it. I need your help. Florence invited her inside, and Martha told her story. The childbirth had been complicated, the mother already weak from illness. Martha had done everything she could, but sometimes that wasn't enough. Now the family wanted her head, literally, and the town was dividing into factions, those who believed in Martha's innocence and those who wanted her punished. I'm not a witch, Martha said desperately. I'm just a midwife who's been delivering babies for 30 years, but they need someone to blame, and I'm convenient. Florence felt a kinship with this woman immediately. I understand. The same thing happened to me. Then you know how it feels being accused of evil when all you've done is try to help people. Martha's eyes filled with tears. I can't run. This is my home, my life, but I don't know how to fight them. You're not alone, Florence said, making a decision. We'll help you. Vincent and I and the people here. We'll stand with you. Why would you do that? You don't even know me. Because if we don't stand together, they'll pick us off one by one. Florence took Martha's hand. We have to show them that healers aren't to be feared, that what we do is good and necessary, and the only way to do that is to refuse to be silenced. That evening, Florence called a meeting with Vincent, Josiah, and several of the ranch hands who had become her close friends. She laid out her idea. Instead of hiding from the accusations, they would confront them head on. They would go to Colorado City and defend Martha publicly, educating people about healing and medicine, showing them that there was nothing supernatural or evil about it. That's risky, Josiah said, though he didn't sound entirely opposed. You could make things worse for both of you. Or we could make things better, Florence countered. Vincent, you said we need to change minds. This is how we do it. By being visible. By refusing to be ashamed of who we are. Vincent was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. Finally, he nodded. I think you're right. Hiding hasn't worked. It just makes people more suspicious. Maybe it's time to try a different approach. You're both insane, Josiah said, but there was a hint of admiration in his voice. But I suppose someone has to be. All right, I'll support you, and I'll make sure the sheriff knows what you're planning, so he can keep things from getting out of hand. The next day, they rode into Colorado City, Florence, Vincent, Martha, and a dozen ranch hands as protection. Word of their arrival spread quickly, and soon a crowd gathered in the main street. Florence could feel the tension in the air, the mixture of curiosity and hostility. She stood up in the back of a wagon so everyone could see her, her heart pounding but her voice steady. My name is Florence Jameson, and I'm a healer. Some of you have called me a witch. Today I'm here to tell you that you're wrong." The crowd murmured, but Florence pressed on. "I was born with a gift for healing, same as some people are born with a gift for music or mathematics. I don't control it completely, and I don't understand how it works, but I know it's not evil. I know it's not witchcraft. It's just part of who I am." "How do we know that?" someone shouted. "How do we know you're not in league with the devil?" "Because I've spent my life trying to save people, not harm them," Florence said. "Because I've healed wounds and cured infections and brought people back from the edge of death. Would the devil give someone the power to do good?" "The devil deceives," the widower called out, his face still twisted with grief. "He makes evil look like good." "Then judge me by my actions, not by your fear," Florence replied. "Every person I've healed is still alive, still healthy. I've never harmed anyone, never cursed anyone. All I've done is help to the best of my ability." Martha stepped up beside her. "I'm Martha Davis, and I'm a midwife. I've been delivering babies in this town for 30 years. I've brought most of your children into the world, and yes, sometimes mothers die, despite everything I do. Sometimes babies die too. That's not witchcraft. That's tragedy. It's the risk every woman takes when she becomes pregnant. But blaming me for it, calling me a witch, that won't bring anyone back. It just destroys another innocent life." A woman in the crowd stepped forward, an older lady Florence recognized as the owner of the general store. "Martha delivered both my children," she said loudly. "And when I was sick with fever last winter, Miss Florence's herbs saved my life. These women aren't witches. They're healers, and we need them." "Amen to that," another voice called out. More people began speaking up, sharing stories of times Florence or Martha had helped them or their families. The tide of opinion was shifting, fear giving way to reason. But the widower wasn't convinced. "You're all being deceived," he insisted. "These women are dangerous. We need to—" "Need to what?" Vincent stepped forward, his voice hard. "String them up? Burn them? Kill them for the crime of healing people? Is that the kind of town you want Colorado City to be? I want justice for my wife." "Your wife died of fever, and I'm sorry for your loss. Truly, I am." Vincent's voice softened slightly. "But killing Florence won't bring her back. It won't ease your pain. It'll just add more death to death, more tragedy to tragedy." Sheriff Morrison pushed through the crowd. "He's right. I've been sheriff here for 12 years, and I've never seen a shred of evidence that either of these women has done anything wrong. They're healers, plain and simple, and I won't stand by and let them be persecuted for it." The crowd was quieter now, the anger fading as reason took hold. The widower looked around, seeing that he had lost the support of the mob, and his shoulders slumped in defeat. He walked away without another word, grief etched into every line of his body. Florence felt the tension drain out of her. They had done it. They had stood up to the accusations and won, not with violence, but with truth and courage. Over the next few weeks, the atmosphere in Colorado City changed. People began coming to Florence and Martha for help again, tentatively at first, then with growing trust. The two women formed a partnership, combining Florence's gift and Martha's experience to provide better care than either could alone. Vincent stood by Florence through all of it, her constant protector and support. And when their daughter was born in late autumn, healthy and beautiful, with her father's dark hair and her mother's green eyes, Florence felt like her happiness was complete. They named her Grace, because she was a blessing they had never expected. And when Grace was 3 days old, Florence was holding her by the window when she felt it, that familiar warmth in her palms, the telltale sign of the healing gift. "Vincent," she called softly, "come feel this." Vincent crossed the room and placed his hand near Grace's tiny form. His eyes widened. "She has it too, the gift." "Yes." Florence looked down at her daughter, feeling a complex mixture of emotions. "She'll face the same challenges I did, the same fears." "But she won't face them alone," Vincent said firmly. "She'll have us. And we'll teach her to be proud of her gift, not ashamed. We'll show her that being different is something to celebrate, not hide. Florence nodded, tears in her eyes. We'll raise her to be brave, to use her gift to help people, but also to protect herself, to know that she's not cursed or evil, just special. Gifted, Vincent said, echoing the word he had used that first day. Our daughter is gifted, and that's a beautiful thing. As Florence held her daughter and felt Vincent's arms around them both, she thought about how far she had come, from a terrified woman kneeling in the street, expecting to be killed for saving a life, to a wife and mother surrounded by love and acceptance. The journey had been terrifying and painful, but also transformative. She had learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but acting despite it. That love could bloom in the unlikeliest circumstances, that standing up for what was right, even when it was dangerous, could change the world in small but important ways. And she had learned that gifts, even those that seemed like curses, could become blessings if you had the right people beside you. As Grace grew, Florence and Vincent raised her with love and careful instruction. They taught her about her healing gift, how to use it, and when to hide it. They taught her to be proud of who she was while also being wise about the dangers she might face. And they made sure she knew that she was loved and valued, not despite her differences, but because of them. The years passed peacefully. Florence and Vincent had 2 more children, a son named Joshua and another daughter named Hope. Neither of them showed signs of the healing gift, but they were loving and kind and fiercely protective of their older sister. Martha became like a grandmother to the children, teaching them about midwifery and medicine. The partnership between her and Florence grew stronger over the years, and together they improved healthcare in Colorado City and the surrounding area dramatically. The infant mortality rate dropped. Fewer women died in childbirth. Injuries that would have been crippling healed cleanly. People still whispered about Florence's gift sometimes, still crossed themselves when she passed, but mostly they were grateful. She had become an integral part of the community, someone people turned to in their darkest moments. And Vincent was always there beside her, her protector and partner, making sure no one dared to threaten her again. When Grace turned 18, a young man came courting her. He was a doctor's apprentice who had heard about the healing woman of Colorado City and wanted to learn from her. When he discovered that Florence's daughter had the same gift, he was fascinated rather than frightened. He called Grace remarkable, extraordinary, brilliant. Florence watched her daughter fall in love with a man who valued her gift and felt like her own story had come full circle. She had been saved by a man who called her gifted when the world called her cursed. Now her daughter had found someone who saw her the same way. On Grace's wedding day, Florence stood beside Vincent and watched their daughter marry the young doctor. The ceremony was held at the ranch, which had become more prosperous over the years, thanks in part to Florence's medical care for the hands. The whole town turned out to celebrate. The same people who had once called for Florence's death now raising glasses to toast her daughter's happiness. "We did it," Florence said softly to Vincent. "We built something good here, something lasting." "We did," Vincent agreed, pulling her close. "And it all started because you were brave enough to save a dying man, even though you knew the risk. Your courage changed everything, Florence. It changed me, it changed this town, it changed our children's futures." "Our courage," Florence corrected. "You stood up for me when no one else would. You called me gifted when everyone else called me cursed. You gave me the strength to believe in myself." Vincent kissed her temple. "We gave each other strength. That's what love does." They watched Grace and her new husband dance, watched their other children laughing with friends, watched the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and rose. And Florence thought about the girl she had been, terrified and alone, convinced that her gift was a curse that would destroy her. She had been so wrong. Her gift hadn't destroyed her. It had led her to Vincent, to this life, to this moment. It had brought her love and family and purpose. It had allowed her to save lives and change minds and make a difference in the world. Years later, when Florence and Vincent were old and gray, they would sit on their porch and tell their grandchildren stories about the early days, about the mob and the accusations, about standing up for what was right, about finding love in the midst of fear. The grandchildren would listen with wide eyes, amazed that their gentle grandmother had once been accused of witchcraft, that their grandfather had defended her against a mob. "Were you scared, Grandma?" one would always ask. "Terrified," Florence would admit. "But your grandfather taught me that being scared doesn't mean you can't be brave. It means you have a choice. Let the fear control you or act despite it. And every time I chose to act." "That's what made her extraordinary," Vincent would add, taking her hand. "Not the healing gift, though that was remarkable, but the courage to use it even when it put her in danger, the compassion to help people even when they turned against her. That's what made me fall in love with her, and it's what I've loved about her every day since." And Florence would squeeze his hand and think about how lucky she was, how blessed, to have lived a life of purpose and love, to have raised children who understood the value of gifts, whether they possessed them or not, to have helped people and changed minds and made the world just a little bit better. She had been accused of witchcraft for healing others, and a cowboy had protected her and called her gifted. That simple act of courage and kindness had blossomed into a lifetime of love, a family, a legacy. It had proven that even in the harsh, unforgiving world of the Old West, compassion could triumph over fear, love could conquer hatred, and gifts could be blessings instead of curses. On her last day, surrounded by Vincent and their children and grandchildren, Florence closed her eyes and felt the healing warmth one final time. It flowed through her, not to mend her aging body, but to fill her with peace. She had lived well. She had loved deeply. She had made a difference. And in the end, that was all that mattered. Vincent held her hand as she slipped away, tears streaming down his weathered face. But they were tears of gratitude as much as grief. Gratitude for every moment they had shared, every challenge they had overcome together, every life they had touched. "Thank you," he whispered, "for letting me protect you, for letting me love you, for being the most extraordinary person I ever knew." And though Florence was beyond hearing, he liked to think she understood. That somewhere in whatever came next, she felt his love following her like a blessing. The way his love had always followed her, from that first moment in the dusty street of Colorado City to this final goodbye, the cowboy and the healer, the protector and the gifted, two souls who had found each other against all odds and built a love that changed the world one healing touch at a time. Their story became legend in Colorado City, passed down through generations. The tale of the healer who was accused of witchcraft and the cowboy who defended her, who together proved that gifts should be celebrated, not feared. That love could bloom even in the harshest circumstances. That courage and compassion could change hearts and minds. And every time a healer in that part of Colorado faced suspicion or fear, someone would tell the story of Florence and Vincent Jameson, of how they stood together against ignorance and won, of how one man's courage and one woman's gift became a legacy of hope that endured long after they were gone. The cabin where they lived was preserved as a historical site. Their children donated Florence's medical journals to the local library, where aspiring healers could learn from her wisdom. And every year on the anniversary of the day Vincent first called Florence gifted, the town held a celebration honoring all the healers and medical professionals who served the community. It was a reminder that every person has gifts to offer the world, and that those gifts should be nurtured and celebrated, not suppressed and feared. It was a reminder that standing up for what's right, even when it's dangerous, can change history. And it was a reminder that love, true and deep and abiding, can overcome any obstacle. Florence and Vincent's love story had become more than just their own. It had become a beacon of hope for anyone who had ever felt different, marginalized, or afraid. It proved that you don't have to hide who you are to be accepted, that the right person will love you not despite your differences, but because of them. That courage is contagious, and compassion is powerful, and love, in the end, conquers all. Their daughter Grace carried on Florence's healing work, treating patients with the same combination of medical knowledge and intuitive gift. She taught her own children to be proud of their abilities and to use them to help others. The healing gift continued through the family line, generation after generation, each one learning from the last. And always, the story was told. The story of how it all began. In a dusty street in Colorado City in 1878, when a young woman risked everything to save a dying man and a cowboy risked everything to save her. When gifts were redefined as blessings and witchcraft accusations were transformed into celebrations of the extraordinary. It was a love story, yes, but it was also a story about courage and compassion, about standing up for what's right and refusing to let fear win. It was about finding your people, your purpose, your place in the world. And it was about the transformative power of love, which can take two lonely, hurting people and give them everything they never knew they needed. Florence Zimmerman and Vincent Jameson lived fully and loved completely, and their legacy endured long after they were gone. In the museums and libraries, in the stories and songs, in the lives they touched, and the minds they changed, they lived on. Two souls who found each other in the wild, untamed West, and proved that even in the harshest circumstances, love and courage can build something beautiful, something lasting, something that echoes through time, reminding us all that our differences are not curses but gifts, that standing up for others is always the right choice, and that love, when it's real and true, can change the world. And so their story ends not with an ending but with a beginning. The beginning of a new way of thinking, a new way of seeing healers and gifts and the extraordinary people who possess them. The beginning of a legacy that would inspire generations to come. The beginning of a love that never truly died but transformed into something greater. Something that could touch hearts and change minds long after the lovers themselves had passed into memory and legend. Florence and Vincent Jameson. The healer and the cowboy, the gifted and the protector, forever remembered, forever loved, forever an example of what courage and compassion can accomplish when paired with true love. Their happily ever after wasn't just their own. It belonged to everyone who heard their story and found the courage to stand up, speak out, and embrace their own gifts. It belonged to every healer who faced suspicion and chose to keep healing anyway. It belonged to every protector who stood up for the vulnerable and the misunderstood. And it belonged to everyone who ever believed that love, in the end, is the greatest gift of all.